At my daughter's wedding, I walked toward my reserved seat, only to find a trash can placed there instead. My chest tightened, but instead of breaking down, I steadied myself and smiled, remembering every year I'd held this family together. Without a word, I calmly pushed the can aside and sat down, my presence louder than any insult they could throw. What they didn't know was that this little joke had just opened the door to something much bigger. Before I continue the story, please subscribe to the channel and leave a comment letting me know where you're watching from. I woke up earlier than usual that morning, long before the alarm clock had a chance to ring. The room was still dim, the curtains barely letting in the first threads of daylight. I moved slowly, careful with each step as if the day carried a weight too heavy to rush. I laid out the dress I had chosen weeks ago, a soft navy blue, modest but elegant enough for such an occasion. Pinned neatly on the collar was my late husband's brooch, a small silver rose he'd given me on our 30th anniversary. Just touching it reminded me of his steady voice, always telling me to keep my chin up no matter what life threw at me. As I looked in the mirror, smoothing the lines of the fabric, I whispered to myself, maybe today will be different. Maybe she'll finally look at me and see her mother, not her mistake. That thought lingered as I gathered my purse and keys. The drive to the church was quiet, the streets mostly empty. By the time I pulled into the parking lot, I could already hear faint laughter spilling from the reception hall. Balloons and ribbons fluttered in the warm Midwestern breeze, families streaming inside with smiles wide enough to hide any tension. Inside, the hall glowed with soft lights strung along the rafters, flowers neatly arranged on every table. The scent of roses mixed with roasted chicken made my stomach turn, not from hunger, but from nerves. I spotted neighbors and old family friends, each offering polite greetings. "Lovely to see you here," one woman murmured, her smile a little too quick, her eyes sliding away before mine could settle. Another leaned close, whispering, "Oh, I didn't see your name on the seating chart." I laughed lightly, brushing it off, though something cold settled in my chest. My daughter, Emily, stood across the room in her white gown, radiant like the magazines promised, but her eyes never lingered on me for more than a second. I tried to keep walking, to keep believing that my place was still where it had always been, beside family. The sound of glasses clinking and chairs scraping filled the room as people took their seats. I moved slowly down the aisle between tables, clutching my purse tighter. My eyes scanned the cards, each neatly handwritten, each guiding another person to comfort. But as I circled once, twice, my own card never appeared. Maybe it slipped, I told myself, forcing a small smile as a cousin brushed past me. He avoided my gaze, muttering something about checking on the drinks. The laughter of children running between tables filled the silence I felt pressing against me. I paused near the family table, my heart beginning to drum louder than the music. Something seemed odd, a shape out of place among the satin covers and crystal glasses. From a distance, I couldn't quite make sense of it. My hands trembled as I drew closer, the sound of my shoes against the polished floor somehow louder than the chatter around me. And then I saw it. Where my chair should have been, where my name should have marked my place beside my family, sat a gray plastic trash can. Not tucked discreetly away, not hidden in some corner. Right there, bold as daylight, as if it were some twisted joke. A ripple went through the nearby guests. Some gasped softly, others chuckled under their breath, unsure whether to laugh or look away. I froze, staring at it, the edges of the room blurring. My throat dried, my palms damp. Emily's voice cut through the haze, sharp and casual. "Oh, Mom, don't be so dramatic. It's just a joke." I blinked at her, words catching in my throat. Finally, I managed, "Is this really necessary, Emily?" My voice was quiet, strained, but it carried. She smirked, tilting her head as if I had asked something ridiculous. "Lighten up. It's funny." Her new husband chimed in, adding fuel. "Hey, at least you've got a front row seat," he laughed, drawing nervous giggles from a few around us. Others stared at their plates, unwilling to be caught choosing sides. I stood motionless, every detail burned into memory. The way the flowers seemed to mock me with their brightness, the way my daughter's lips curled with satisfaction, the way the guests shifted uneasily, caught between loyalty and amusement. A saying my husband used to repeat floated back: respect is a two-way street. And there I was, shoved into the gutter. The humiliation was sharp, almost unbearable, yet I forced myself to breathe, to stand tall. I would not give them the scene they wanted. My sister leaned close from across the table, her hand briefly brushing mine under the linen. "Dolores, don't," she whispered, sympathy etched into her eyes. I drew in a slow breath, pressing my palm flat against my purse to stop the shaking. Inside, my phone buzzed faintly against a folded envelope I'd kept hidden for months. I straightened, fixing my gaze not on the trash can, but on my daughter's face. "If this is what you think of me," I murmured to myself, "you have no idea what you've invited into this room." The laughter resumed around me, light and careless, as if my pain were nothing more than background noise. I reached into my bag, pulling out my phone. The screen lit up, casting a pale glow against the white tablecloth. My reflection stared back, steadier now, no longer just a mother humiliated, but a woman ready to fight on her own terms. "They think I'm trash today," I thought, slipping the phone into my hand. "But they'll learn soon enough." I lifted my head, forcing a half smile, already piecing together what came next. I stayed seated after they pulled that ugly stunt with the trash can. My body ached with humiliation, but I forced myself not to flinch. The reception hall was still humming with laughter and music, but I felt like I'd been shoved into a separate world. I moved to a table at the far end of the room, near the wall of frosted glass that separated the reception area from the hallway. My plate sat in front of me, untouched. The roast chicken smelled rich, the green beans glistened with butter, but I couldn't bring myself to lift my fork. My hands kept fidgeting, twisting the thin band of my wedding ring, a piece of metal that felt like the last thread holding my dignity together. Now and then I caught glances from across the room. Guests tilted their heads toward me, whispering behind folded napkins, eyes darting back to check if I noticed. Some smirked, others looked quickly away, pretending I wasn't there at all. My heart pressed hard against my ribs, the silence I kept inside burning hotter than any outburst. An older cousin finally shuffled over, set her hand on my shoulder, and gave a weak smile. "Don't take it personally," she said softly, almost apologetically. "You know how kids are these days." Her words did nothing to comfort me. They only deepened the sting. Still, I nodded, forcing a smile. My voice wouldn't rise, not yet. As minutes crawled by, the noise of the room seemed to shift. The laughter sharpened. I started to pick up the fragments of conversations that weren't meant for my ears. "She shouldn't even be here," floated over from a corner. Another woman, one of my daughter's friends, let out a short giggle before leaning close to whisper something, sending their little group into more hushed laughter. Their champagne glasses clinked like punctuation marks on every cruel remark. I leaned back in my chair, letting the sound wash over me. This wasn't just about tonight. No, this was years of small slights building up. Phone calls never returned, holidays where my chair was mysteriously left off the seating plan, jokes told at my expense. In a town like ours, reputation was fragile. One humiliation could cling to you like a bad odor for years. I thought of my neighbors, my church friends. Word would spread fast. I steadied myself with a thought I'd repeated many times over the years. Respect yourself first, or no one else will. The weight of it grounded me, like a stone held in my pocket. A waiter passed by, his eyes catching mine. He didn't say anything, but he poured more water into my glass with deliberate care. That tiny kindness touched me more than any words. It reminded me that not everyone in this room had chosen cruelty. The urge to stand up and walk out rose in me, but I swallowed it down. Leaving early would hand them victory. I wasn't about to give them that satisfaction. Then, with the sharp clink of a knife against a glass, the room's chatter dropped. The groom stood, microphone in hand, face flushed with drink and self-importance. "Ladies and gentlemen," he began, his voice too loud, "I'd like to propose a toast." His grin stretched wide, and I felt a cold dread sweep over me. Instead of thanking family or honoring love, his words twisted into a performance of mockery. "Now, weddings are about unity," he said, eyes flicking in my direction. "But sometimes certain individuals don't seem to know their place." Laughter erupted around him, the cruel kind that fills a room like smoke. I felt heat rise in my chest, my fingers crushing the napkin in my lap. My daughter, glowing in her white dress, leaned against him, smiling as though every jab were music to her ears. She called out, "Yes, Mom, maybe you should just relax and enjoy the trash can. We thought it suited you." Her words sliced deeper than anything before. The crowd split, half laughed loudly, clapping each other's shoulders, while the other half shifted uncomfortably, eyes downcast, pretending to sip their drinks. My heart pounded, but I stayed silent. I remembered something my late husband once told me. "Dignity is power. Lose it, and you give them everything." Those words rang in my ears like a commandment, so I steadied my breathing, holding on to every shred of composure. I sat there while their laughter swirled around me, knowing this cruelty wasn't random. It was deliberate, coordinated, and public. They wanted to break me in front of everyone. But I would not give them the satisfaction. When the clapping faded and the room returned to its chatter, I didn't rise, didn't yell. I observed. I saw who laughed the hardest, who looked away in shame, and who frowned as though they'd finally seen the mask slip. My brother-in-law shook his head with disgust. An old neighbor gave me a sympathetic look. Someone leaned close to me, whispering, "If I were you, I'd sue them for this." I only gave a small smile, my lips tight but steady. Sometimes silence was louder than rage. I rose at last, but not in anger. I stepped out into the hallway, the glass door shutting behind me, muffling the music and voices. The air was cooler here, quieter. I held a glass of water, letting its chill steady my trembling hands. Then my phone buzzed in my purse. A message glowed on the screen, an old email, unopened for months, waiting. I stared at it for a long moment, then let a faint smile cross my face. "Maybe tonight is when I finally use this," I whispered to myself. They thought they had won. But what they didn't realize was that this wasn't the end. This was evidence. I slipped out of the ballroom after that humiliating toast, the laughter still echoing behind me like knives in the back. The hallway was dimmer, the music muffled by heavy doors, but I could still feel the sting of their words clinging to me. I paused by the glass doors that looked out onto the courtyard, catching my own reflection in the faint light. My lipstick had smudged, my hair was slightly out of place, but my eyes carried something different now, not defeat, determination. I found a small water station tucked against the wall and poured myself a glass, my hands trembling at first. I took slow sips, letting the cool liquid steady me. The irony wasn't lost on me. My daughter and her smug husband thought their little performance had crushed me, that I'd shrink away quietly. But they had no idea what I carried with me tonight. My hand drifted down to my purse, fingers brushing the leather flap. Inside, nestled between tissues and a lipstick tube, was the one thing they couldn't take from me. I inhaled deeply, closed my eyes for a moment, and let the silence of the hallway wash over me. In that pause, I felt the weight of the secret I carried and the power it held. Months earlier, the letter had arrived. I remembered the day so clearly, as if the ink still lingered fresh on my fingertips. The envelope had been thick, cream-colored, with an embossed seal in the corner. My heart skipped when I saw the handwriting on the front. Mr. Thompson, my late husband's attorney. He had been with us for decades, through every milestone and setback. I tore it open at the kitchen table, the sunlight streaming in through lace curtains, and pulled out the folded document. The words inside were formal but clear. My husband had left me ownership of the very venue we stood in tonight. The place where my daughter now pretended I was nothing. I ran my hand over the embossed letterhead, reading each line twice, then a third time, as if the truth would vanish if I blinked. When I'd visited Thompson afterward, he'd looked me in the eye and spoken quietly, almost like a father. "Don't mention this unless you need to," he said. "It's your right, but it's also your shield." I remembered hesitating, telling him I couldn't imagine a day I'd have to pull out such a weapon. He nodded, understanding but firm. "Then let it rest until the moment comes. Your husband wanted you to have this voice." I pressed the letter against my chest that night, tears sliding down my cheeks, whispering his name into the stillness of the house. It wasn't about the property, it was about him making sure I'd never be silenced again. Now, standing in that hallway, I opened my purse just enough to feel the edge of the folded paper. The texture was heavier than ordinary stationery, almost as if it carried the weight of truth itself. I traced its corner with my fingertips, steadying my breath. This isn't just paper, I thought. It's power. In my mind, I heard my husband's voice, warm yet unyielding. "Stand tall, Mary. Don't let them write your story." His words stirred something deep inside me, stronger than any bitterness or humiliation I had felt. I glanced through the narrow gap of the ballroom doors. I saw her, my daughter, laughing, champagne glass in hand, her new husband's arm around her waist. They were basking in their own cruelty, smug in their assumption that I was finished. They had no idea. None at all. Carefully, I folded the letter back into place. But it was no longer a hidden burden. It was my chosen weapon. My pulse quickened as I realized what I could do with it tonight. The power to flip the narrative rested inside my purse, and suddenly the humiliation I'd endured seemed almost irrelevant. What mattered was the moment to come. I stepped into a small side room off the hallway, closing the door softly behind me. A single lamp glowed on a wooden table, casting long shadows. I sat down, pulled a napkin from my purse, and began jotting notes in the margin with a borrowed pen. My thoughts sharpened as I sketched out the players inside, who spoke loudest, who controlled the laughter, who leaned on power they didn't actually have. One by one, I listed them, imagining how they might unravel once I revealed the truth. A soft knock startled me. The door opened just enough for my brother-in-law Richard to poke his head in. "You okay?" he asked, concern etched into his brow. I smiled, slipping the napkin halfway under my purse. "Better than they think," I said, my voice steady and almost light. He lingered a second, searching my face, then nodded and let the door close again. The silence returned, and with it, my resolve. Dignity wasn't silence, it was strategy, and strategy was exactly what I carried with me. I smoothed the letter once more, then tucked it away. Rising to my feet, I straightened my dress, checked my reflection in the small mirror above the table, and pressed my lips together. My heart was steady now. As I walked back toward the ballroom, the muffled sound of the DJ's voice carried through the double doors, announcing another speech. I paused at the threshold, my hand resting on the cool brass handle. I could hear laughter erupting inside, but this time it didn't sting. "They think I'm beaten," I told myself. "But tonight, I'm holding the script." I tightened my grip on the purse, the letter's presence firm against my side. Whether I revealed it now or later, the truth was mine to wield. I left the ballroom threshold with steady steps, my fingers tightening around the strap of my purse. Inside it lay the letter, its folded weight pressing down on me like a stone. I had thought about revealing it right there during the toast, but something held me back. Timing, my husband used to say, was as important as truth. So I swallowed the lump in my throat and turned down a narrow corridor that branched away from the laughter and clinking glasses. The music behind me was muffled now, replaced by the shuffle of staff carrying trays and the faint rattle of dishes. The hallway was dimmer, lined with doors for service rooms and storage. My heels tapped quietly on the tile floor, the sound small compared to the muffled cheers behind the closed doors. I noticed how the joy inside contrasted with my solitude out here. One world full of lights, the other shadows. The letter in my purse seemed heavier with every step I took. That's when I caught the sound, a low murmur, like a private current under still water. It drifted from a half-open door at the end of the hall. I slowed down, my heart thudding in my chest. Curiosity tugged at me. Sometimes truth doesn't knock on your door. It leaks through cracks if you're willing to listen. I moved closer, the light from the lounge spilling into the hall like a secret waiting to be found. I pressed myself against the wall, tilting my head toward the doorway. Voices slipped through, familiar ones that froze me in place. My daughter's laugh, my son-in-law's hushed tone. The air tightened around me. "She doesn't matter," he said flatly, his voice like a knife carving each word. "After tonight, she'll be out of the picture for good." A younger relative, my niece, perhaps, gave a soft laugh. "Honestly, I don't know why she even bothered showing up. She's just old news." My daughter chimed in, her tone laced with mockery. "She doesn't even fight back anymore. It's almost pathetic. She just sits there like she's invisible." The sting of those words cut deeper than I expected. My stomach twisted, my pulse quickened, yet I couldn't step away. Their laughter rolled through the room, feeding on one another's cruelty. The betrayal burned, sharper than any humiliation I'd faced in public. For a moment I pressed my hand against the doorframe, needing something solid to hold on to. I wanted to believe I misheard, but the voices were clear, cruel, and unmistakable. Then my son-in-law's voice dropped to a colder register. "Once we secure the deed, we'll have control. She won't have a place left to crawl back to." My breath caught, and my daughter's voice answered, steady, ruthless. "She's too weak to fight. Don't worry, I'll make sure she doesn't even get a chance." The words slammed into me. They weren't just cruel children mocking their mother. They were plotting something deliberate, something calculated. They knew about the property. They wanted it. My husband's voice echoed in my memory, a line he'd repeated through the years. "Trust paper, not promises." I thought of the letter resting in my purse, the original deed, proof of what belonged to me. They didn't know I held it. That ignorance was my only shield, and my greatest weapon. I stood frozen at the threshold, my hand trembling on the doorknob. I could storm in now, expose their venom in front of their co-conspirators, but another part of me, quieter, sharper, whispered to wait. A chess player doesn't reveal her queen too soon. Pawns may be sacrificed, but strategy wins wars. The betrayal from my daughter stung in a way my son-in-law's greed never could. Blood is supposed to be sanctuary, not a knife in the back. Yet here she was, sharpening the blade with her own words. My chest ached, but I straightened my back, forcing my breath to steady. I stepped back from the door, unseen. The corridor stretched ahead, dim and lonely, but I walked it with purpose. Betrayal from strangers hurts. Betrayal from your own child leaves scars you carry to the grave. Still, I wouldn't give them the satisfaction of breaking me. Family, I thought, was supposed to be your harbor. When it isn't, you learn how to swim alone. My daughter's laughter echoed in my ears, searing itself into memory. I reached into my purse, brushing the letter with my fingertips, then pulled out a napkin. With a borrowed pen from my bag, I wrote one line in firm strokes. "They think I don't matter. They're wrong." I folded the napkin and tucked it back into the purse, a private vow sealed in ink. By the time I reached the ballroom doors again, the DJ's voice rang out above the music. "And now, The bride will share a few words. I paused, hand on the handle. My pulse quickened. If they believed I was invisible, then my silence was the mask they'd soon regret. I touched the folded letter once more and stepped forward, knowing the night was far from over. I stepped back into the ballroom, the doors opening to a wave of music and chatter. The chandeliers glittered above, spilling light onto polished floors where couples spun and swayed. From a distance, it was a perfect picture. Laughter, clinking glasses, dresses that shimmered under the lights. But I carried the sting of what I had overheard in the lounge. That sting didn't fade when I walked in. It sharpened. I searched for her, and there she was, my daughter, my Evelyn, standing arm in arm with her new husband, a smile painted flawlessly across her face. To everyone else, it looked like happiness. To me, it was a mask, a curtain hiding the cruelty I had just witnessed behind closed doors. Relatives waved politely when they noticed me, though their greetings felt brittle, rehearsed. I caught whispers as I passed, soft, slippery words that slid into silence whenever I drew near. I moved toward a seat at the edge of the room, away from the spotlight. My purse sat heavy in my lap, my hands folded tight over it. Inside was the letter, the truth no one in this glittering room suspected I had carried here. I thought to myself, a room can shine with chandeliers, but still be darker than midnight. I kept my eyes on the floor, unwilling to give them the satisfaction of seeing my pain. The servers began circulating, balancing trays of plates that steamed with roasted chicken and vegetables. When mine finally arrived, it was last, and the food had gone half cold. Across the table, my daughter's friends exchanged quick glances, stifled giggles, then turned away as though I were invisible. One of my cousins leaned back and, loud enough for half the table to hear, joked, "Isn't it past bedtime?" Their laughter erupted like a spark catching dry grass. I pressed a polite smile onto my face, even as my stomach twisted. The sting of humiliation sat sharp in my chest, but I forced myself to lift my fork calmly, pretending the joke hadn't pierced me. An elderly guest, sitting near enough to sense the shift, leaned close and whispered, "Don't let them see you rattled, honey." Her words steadied me for a moment, like a hand placed firmly at my back. Just then, I noticed the DJ adjust his microphone. His posture told me he was preparing for something significant. The music dipped, lights shifting ever so slightly toward the stage. My pulse ticked faster. Something was about to change. The DJ's voice boomed across the ballroom. "Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome the bride and groom for a few words." The crowd applauded as Evelyn and her husband stepped up, glasses raised. They looked so sure of themselves, basking in the warmth of every eye fixed on them. The groom spoke first, his voice steady and rehearsed. "Tonight isn't just about love. It's about building a future together. And sometimes that means leaving the past behind." The applause was immediate, strong, though most missed the barbed edge hidden in his words. I didn't. My heart lurched, recognizing who that past was meant to be. Evelyn lifted her glass, smiling as though she held the whole room in her hands. "And thank you all for supporting us, except some people who think they still matter." It was a dagger wrapped in lace. The room hesitated. Then nervous laughter scattered through the air like glass breaking. A few guests gasped softly, their eyes flicking toward me before they quickly looked away. My cheeks burned hot as if a spotlight had been pinned solely on me. I sat frozen, unable to swallow, unable to breathe. Inside, I thought, humiliation isn't always whispered. Sometimes it's shouted from a stage. My daughter had taken her cruelty public, stripping me of dignity before strangers and kin alike. They basked in applause while I sank into silence, every heartbeat louder than the music. I sipped water slowly, trying to steady the tremor in my hands. Their words replayed in my head over and over, each echo sharper than the last. I remembered raising her, late nights stitching costumes for her school recital, holding her through her first heartbreak. All those memories blurred into one unbearable truth. The child I nurtured now stood there mocking me. In America, people often say, respect is earned, not demanded. Yet here I was, being told my silence was the price of their approval. But humiliation, I reminded myself, could be fuel. I whispered so quietly only I could hear. They think tonight will break me, but I've been broken before. I learned how to rebuild. The betrayal pressed heavy on my shoulders, but beneath it, something else stirred. Resolve. The lights dimmed, and the staff rolled out the towering wedding cake, sparklers shooting little bursts of fire into the air. Guests cheered, glasses lifted high. The celebration swelled, sweeping over the insult as though it had never happened. But my hand rested on my purse. Inside lay the letter, the one truth they didn't know I carried. My mind sharpened, clear as glass. They've made me the punchline. Soon, I'll rewrite the story. As Evelyn and her husband posed with knives poised above the cake, I rose quietly from my chair. No one noticed. All eyes were on the glittering spectacle. I moved toward the stage, not to speak yet, but to be ready. Ready for the moment when every eye would be forced to see me. The clapping had already started to fade, but my ears still rang with the cruel toast from moments ago. People were laughing, glasses raised high, their cheers directed at my daughter and her new husband as though I weren't even in the room. The cake had been cut, the band launched into some light-hearted tune, and the crowd pressed forward to offer their congratulations. From where I sat, it all felt like theater, bright lights, painted smiles, and a stage that had no place for me. I pressed my palm against my purse, fingers brushing the folded envelope inside. Its weight was small, but it grounded me like an anchor in a storm. I told myself to keep breathing, to steady my hands. The louder the room grew, the smaller I felt, as if every laugh and cheer was meant to drown me out completely. A cousin passing by laid a hand on my shoulder. For a moment, I hoped it was comfort, but the look in her eyes wasn't warmth. It was pity, that shallow glance people give when they think you've already lost. She gave a quick smile and disappeared into the crowd, her attention already pulled back toward the glowing couple at the center of it all. The music played on, loud and cheerful, yet it mocked me more than it entertained. I sat, spine straight, holding back every instinct to leave. Near the drinks table, a cluster of bridesmaids whispered among themselves. Their dresses shimmered under the ballroom lights, their voices sharp as glass, even through the noise of the band. "She doesn't matter anymore," one of them said, tipping her head toward me without shame. "This is their show now. She's lucky she even got an invite." The words sliced through the music, straight into me. They weren't talking about some distant relative or an unwanted guest. They were talking about me, the mother of the bride, erased in whispers before the night was even over. My chest tightened, but I forced myself not to react. If I flinched, they'd know their cruelty had hit its mark. I rose, slowly, and crossed toward a nearby table, trying to join in on small talk. But as soon as I approached, the conversation shifted, eyes darted away, smiles tightened into polite masks. Even the server skipped over me once, setting down champagne at every seat but mine. Only after I called out, with more steel in my voice than I'd meant, did he turn back, pretending it was an accident. Respect dies quietly, I thought. First in whispers, then in silence. Needing air, I made my way toward the hallway that led to the restrooms. I hadn't gone far when I froze. Just around the corner, my daughter and her groom stood close, speaking in tones that carried just enough for me to hear. "She won't last much longer," he murmured. "Once she's out of the picture, everything is ours, the venue, the story, the sympathy." My daughter's voice followed, calm and deliberate. "She'll destroy herself. All we have to do is give her the stage." I felt the blood drain from my face. Their words didn't just sting, they gutted me. The toast earlier had been careless cruelty, but this was strategy. This was intent. They weren't just trying to humiliate me in front of family. They were planning a future where I didn't exist. My grip on the purse tightened until my knuckles ached. The letter inside burned like a hidden weapon, one I wasn't sure I was ready to unleash. For a moment, I stood frozen, the shock anchoring me in place. But underneath it, something else rose. An anger so fierce it steadied me. They think they can erase me, I told myself. They think betrayal can pass as progress. Not tonight. I pushed open the door that led to the garden patio. Cold night air rushed against my face, cooling the heat of my skin, but not the fury beneath it. I leaned on the railing, looking out at the dark sky, and let the memories wash over me. Nights spent rocking my daughter to sleep. Days I worked extra shifts to keep her in college. Holidays where I gave her the best even when I had nothing for myself. Every sacrifice replayed itself like an old film, and with it came a single question. How could blood turn its back so easily? I remembered something my father used to say, words I hadn't thought about in years. The enemy closest to you is the one you raise blind to. Tonight, those words became more than a lesson. They were truth, carved into bone. For a fleeting second, I thought about retreat, slipping away quietly, letting them have their night. But pride stiffened my spine. I whispered to myself, almost like a vow, they think I'll crumble. But I've survived storms far louder than this. The letter inside my purse no longer felt like simple protection. It was power, an answer waiting to be spoken. Maybe it wasn't just for me anymore. Maybe it was the strike that would turn the night on its head. When I re-entered the ballroom, the warmth hit me like a wall. The guests were buzzing with joy, clustered around the bride as she soaked in every drop of attention, face glowing with triumph. She looked untouchable, as though she had already won. I walked past relatives without pause, holding my chin high even as my heart thrashed inside me. My eyes locked on her and my thoughts rang clear. Every betrayal leaves an echo. Theirs will return to them louder than they ever imagined. I slipped into a chair closer to the stage, purse clutched to my chest. My fingers brushed the letter once again, lingering there. The decision weighed heavy. Should I unleash it now, tear down their laughter with one swift move, or wait until their joy reached its highest peak? I sat perfectly still, a storm building behind my calm face. One way or another, the night would not end the way they expected. When I stepped back into the ballroom, the air was thick with perfume and laughter, but to me, every note of the music felt off-key. The string quartet played a cheerful waltz, yet the rhythm mocked me, a hollow echo against the storm that had started to churn inside. My daughter and her new husband stood at the center of it all, moving from table to table with practiced smiles, as though their joy was untouched, as though betrayal didn't hide in plain sight. I smoothed my dress, steadying myself, and tried to fold back into the crowd as though nothing had happened outside. But the truth pressed heavy against me. My purse dug into my arm, weighted by the folded letter inside, beating against me like a second heart. I glanced around at the faces, guests raising glasses, clinking forks against plates, gossiping about vacations and new cars, unaware, or maybe unwilling to notice, the fracture that ran beneath the surface. It's strange, I thought, how betrayal can wear a smile so convincingly. My daughter's laughter carried across the room, her arm brushing the groom's, and I knew there was a curtain drawn between what they showed and what they hid. I slipped into my seat at the edge of the family table, only to find it slightly angled away, pushed just enough to create a distance. It wasn't obvious unless you were the one meant to sit there. My fork rested on a crooked napkin, not folded like the others. The gesture wasn't loud, but it screamed all the same. I leaned forward to reach for the champagne tray as a server passed, but the young man glanced past me, pouring into glasses on either side, skipping mine. It wasn't until I raised my hand sharply, "Excuse me, could I have one too?" that he stopped, startled, and filled my flute. He muttered, "Oh, sorry," but his eyes didn't meet mine. From across the table, my granddaughter, still in her flower girl dress with petals caught in her hair, leaned toward me. Her voice was soft, almost conspiratorial. "Grandma," she said, "I heard Uncle Paul say you won't have your house soon. Is that true?" The words hit me harder than the skipped glass of champagne. I swallowed, forced a smile, and brushed a curl from her forehead. "Don't worry about that, sweetheart," I whispered. But inside, the chill set in. This wasn't just about humiliating me at a wedding. There was something larger at play. Something deliberate. I pushed back from the table and drifted toward the catering area, where the groom stood with his parents, half hidden behind a column. His voice was low, but clear enough. "Once the accounts transfer, she'll have no choice but to step aside," he said, almost bragging. His father chuckled, hand firm on his son's shoulder. "She's vulnerable. The property, the estate, it'll all fall into our hands sooner than she thinks." I froze. My chest tightened, the hum of conversation around me dimming to silence. My mind replayed recent weeks, my daughter sliding papers across the kitchen counter, insisting they were just routine, for the family's good. I had refused, uneasy without fully knowing why. Now I understood. Tonight's public humiliation wasn't random. It was a staged performance designed to wear me down, soften me up, make me compliant. They don't just want me forgotten, I realized. They want me erased, not only from their story, but from my own life. My knees threatened to give, but I steadied myself against the wall. Fear coursed through me, but beneath it rose something sharper, resolve. They thought they were playing me into silence. They had no idea silence could be my greatest weapon. I slipped back toward the edge of the room, near the coat rack where shadows gathered. The music and chatter muffled behind me as I let the weight of their scheme settle in my bones. Money, what I once saved as security for my children, had become their weapon against me. All those years of clipping coupons, working late, denying myself little luxuries so they could have better futures, and now my value to them was reduced to bank statements and deeds. "To them," I murmured under my breath, "my worth isn't love, it's a ledger." My hand pressed against my purse. The letter inside no longer felt like paper. It felt like steel, a shield, and if I chose, a sword. I whispered to myself, "I've been underestimated before, but never twice by the same people." I watched as the groom made his way toward the stage, microphone in hand. The spotlight followed him, catching the shine of his suit, the glint of his ring. Applause filled the hall as he prepared to speak, his bride glowing at his side. They thought they had secured everything. Their toast would be the triumphal note to a night meant to erase me completely. But I tightened my grip on the purse, brushing the edge of the envelope. A question flared, sharp and dangerous. Do I let them finish their show, or do I end it here, tearing the curtain down for everyone to see? I stayed standing, my pulse steadying, my mind sharpening into focus. One way or another, the shadows behind their toast would ignite into fire. The applause was still echoing when I tightened my grip around the strap of my purse. My daughter's new husband had just raised his glass, his voice strong and theatrical, thanking everyone for believing in family and trust. The crowd responded with cheers, forks tapping on crystal, champagne spilling in excitement. To them, this ballroom was a palace of joy. To me, it was a theater where every smile was staged and every word rehearsed to hide the truth. I glanced at the envelope resting against my side, pressed inside my purse. It wasn't heavy in weight, but it pressed on me like a stone. I caught my daughter's expression from across the table, so radiant, so polished, but I knew that behind that smile lived sharp edges she no longer cared to hide from me. The groom squeezed her hand and whispered something that made her laugh, but my stomach twisted. That laugh sounded like a victory I wasn't willing to hand them. For a second, I asked myself if I could just let it slide, sit quietly, clap politely, disappear into the shadows of the night. It would be easier, wouldn't it? To pretend I didn't see the strings they were pulling to strip me of the home I built, the savings I worked for, the very security I thought I could pass on to my granddaughter. But as the guests toasted again, their glasses sparkling under chandeliers, I knew silence wasn't safety. It was surrender. I looked toward the children's table where my granddaughter sat with her cousins. Her innocent laughter cut through the lies filling this hall. That sound, bright and unguarded, reminded me why I couldn't fold. A wedding should be a promise of beginnings, not a performance laced with betrayal. The groom raised his glass again, his grin wide, his voice booming. Here's to new futures, built on family and trust. Family. Trust. Words he twisted into armor while plotting behind my back. My pulse hammered in my ears. Enough. I pushed my chair back slowly, letting the sound of wood scraping against marble slice through the applause. Conversations faltered, one by one. Heads turned. The spotlight, meant for them, found its way to me. I stood, legs steady, back straight. From my purse, I pulled the envelope and laid it on the head table, sliding it right between the bride and groom's hands. A murmur rippled through the crowd. My daughter's smile froze. Her hand clutched his tighter, her knuckles white. I spoke clearly, my voice firm but calm. Since we're all toasting to trust, perhaps the truth should join us. Gasps rose, some muffled, some sharp. Guests leaned forward, curiosity lighting their faces. The groom's eyes darted to the envelope as if it were a snake about to strike. My daughter's color drained, her lips pressed into a thin line. The groom forced a laugh. "Mother, surely this isn't—" I cut him off with one sentence. "Open it." The envelope tore. Papers slid out, neat, stamped, notarized. Not promises, not accusations, proof. Proof of my retained ownership of the estate. Proof of the accounts secured in my name, shielded long before they thought to scheme. A wave of whispers swept the room. One guest muttered, "Notarized?" Another leaned close to his neighbor, eyes wide. "It's official." The groom's jaw twitched, his glass lowering. My daughter's eyes flickered from the papers to me, disbelief swimming in her face. The crowd, once celebrating them, now looked at me with something new, recognition. Not of a frail widow, but of a woman who had prepared, who had fought silently until the stage demanded her voice. I stepped back, letting the weight of the revelation crush them instead of me. I didn't need to shout. The papers spoke louder than years of empty promises. They thought my quiet was weakness, but silence had been my shield, my preparation. I remembered those nights alone at my kitchen table, phone pressed to my ear, lawyers walking me through every clause, every signature, every safeguard. They thought they could corner me, but I'd been building walls long before this day. The groom scrambled, his words shaky now. "This isn't the place for—" My daughter hissed at him, voice low but audible. "Stop talking." Her face was pale, her eyes burning with fear and rage. I lifted my glass slowly, raising it toward the guests who hadn't stopped watching. My voice carried through the hall, steady and cutting. "The place is exactly here. The time is exactly now." A hush settled, thick and expectant. My glass gleamed under the chandelier. "To family, the kind that stands even in shadows." Then, before the tension could settle, another chair scraped back. The groom's father rose abruptly, face red, chest heaving. He pointed at me, words caught at the edge of his throat. The room inhaled as one. The fight wasn't over, but neither was mine. The silence after my toast stretched so long I could hear the clinking of glasses from the farthest table. Every head in the room was still turned toward me, toward the envelope I had placed so deliberately on the head table. My daughter sat frozen, her skin drained of color, while the groom's confident smile had slipped away entirely. He fumbled with his napkin, eyes darting to his bride, then back to the envelope that seemed to glow under the chandelier's light. Just when I thought no one would break the spell, the groom's father shot up from his seat. The scrape of his chair against the polished floor was sharp enough to make several guests flinch. His face was crimson, jaw set tight, as if he had been waiting for this moment. "Enough of this charade!" he bellowed, his voice echoing off the ballroom walls. Every eye swiveled toward him. The atmosphere changed instantly, like the air had been pierced by a blade. I leaned back slightly, my hands steady on my lap, and thought to myself, so, the true puppeteer finally steps into the light. He wasted no time. "This is supposed to be a wedding!" he roared, pointing one thick finger at me. "Not some courtroom where bitter old grudges are paraded around for spectacle." His words dripped with contempt. "You've humiliated my son on the most important day of his life. What kind of mother does that? What kind of woman thrives on bitterness?" Gasps fluttered around the room. A few guests nodded in awkward agreement, unwilling to be caught on the wrong side. Others frowned, their expressions heavy with doubt. My daughter gripped her groom's hand under the table, her eyes lowered, unable to look at me. The groom, meanwhile, puffed his chest as if his father's words gave him back some strength. I remained seated, my posture calm. I didn't need to raise my voice. The louder a man shouts, the more guilt he tries to bury. And his words, meant to wound, betrayed him far louder than silence ever could. He paced a few steps, gathering momentum. "She's vengeful," he pressed on, stabbing the air with his hand, "overshadowing her daughter's day just to settle scores. Do you all not see it? This is a wedding, not a stage for her drama." Whispers grew louder, the crowd splitting like a tide. Some shrank back in discomfort, while others leaned forward, sensing that more was about to unravel. His fist slammed onto the table, rattling the silverware. "These so-called documents are nothing but misleading nonsense," he spat, glaring at me as though the sheer force of his stare could burn holes. But before I could reply, a voice rose from the crowd. It was steady, calm, and carried the kind of authority that silence can't ignore. An older man stepped forward, my late husband's longtime friend and once our family attorney. He adjusted his glasses, holding up a small folder of his own. "Actually," he said, his tone even, "I have a copy of those same records, and they are very much authentic." Gasps broke out, louder this time, rippling across the ballroom like a wave. The father's face faltered, the confident bluster slipping for the first time. A sheen of sweat appeared at his temple as he barked back, "You don't know what you're talking about." But it was too late. My daughter leaned toward her father-in-law, whispering harshly under her breath, her veil trembling with each syllable. The groom's knuckles whitened where he clutched his glass. The guests began piecing it together. This wasn't about family honor or unity. It was about the father's own business interests, tied to the estate I had just exposed. His voice, once so commanding, now sounded strained, defensive. "She twists the truth. She wants to tear us apart," he sputtered. Yet the more he denied, the more obvious his motives became. I sat still, glass in hand, watching the unraveling. His authority was crumbling not because of what I had said, but because his own arrogance had revealed the cracks. Inwardly, I whispered to myself, "Age doesn't weaken truth, it sharpens it." Power hides behind titles, patriarch, benefactor, father-in-law. But once the mask slips, all that's left is fear. I looked at my daughter and saw the same confusion I had once carried when I chose silence just to keep peace. I would not let her be trapped the way I had been. The murmurs swelled, some guests now openly defending me, others too cautious to speak but unwilling to meet the father's eyes. My daughter's face reflected conflict, loyalty to her husband's family clashing with the weight of truth laid bare before her. I steadied myself. This wasn't just about exposing lies. It was about breaking the cycle of silence that had shadowed my family for too long. Cornered, the father's voice rose sharper. His finger jabbed in my direction. "This woman forged those papers. I'll see her dragged into court for fraud if I have to." A collective gasp followed. My granddaughter, sitting near the front, let out a soft cry. The innocence in her reaction pierced deeper than his rage ever could. I rose slowly from my chair, my movements deliberate, every eye following me. My voice, calm but firm, carried across the hall. Try me. I've lived long enough to know how to fight men like you. The room erupted with murmurs, some siding, some questioning, all unsettled. And just as the storm threatened to split the room in half, the groom himself stood. He raised a hand, not to defend his father, but to speak. And the look in his eyes promised a revelation that would silence us all. I thought, the louder the storm, the closer the lightning. The ballroom was still buzzing after the father's dirty dealings had been dragged into the light. Guests shifted uncomfortably in their seats, some whispering behind gloved hands, others staring openly at the family as if waiting for another scandal to burst. My daughter stood pale and rigid, clutching the lace at her waist, her knuckles white. The air hung heavy, like a storm right before the sky split open. Then, suddenly, the groom rose. His chair screeched across the polished floor, cutting through the noise like a knife. His hand trembled as it pressed flat against the table, but his voice carried with an odd steadiness. "Enough," he said. "There's something more you all need to hear." My daughter's eyes widened, her breath sharp and shallow. She looked like a child again, terrified of what she couldn't control. I could feel my stomach sink as if I already knew what was about to follow. I thought, when the young decide to speak, the truth either frees them or ruins them. Gasps rolled across the room, every head turned, every glass frozen midway to lips. Even the officiant clutched his book closer, as though afraid it might not be enough to shield him from what came next. The groom swallowed hard. "I can't let this wedding continue without telling the truth," he said, "even if it destroys everything." His words tumbled faster now, jagged with desperation. He confessed that he had known about his father's manipulations for months. "I told myself it wasn't my burden to carry," he admitted, voice cracking. "But silence made me his accomplice." My daughter shook her head violently, tears starting to gather at the corners of her eyes. "No," she whispered, almost begging. "You didn't." He cut her off, choking on his own words. "I did. I knew he was pressuring us, pushing the wedding forward because of his business schemes, and I stayed quiet. I told myself I loved you enough to make it work, that love would drown out the lies." The guests were restless now, some murmuring that he was brave, others muttering that he was a coward who had waited too long. His shoulders shook, but he kept going, voice raw with conflict. "I do love you," he said, staring at my daughter with a desperation that twisted my chest. "But I let greed and fear mix into it, and I let that poison spread." I thought, the chains we forge in silence often weigh more than those forced on us. His tears fell freely now, and though some pitied him, to me it was too late. His apology carried more betrayal than comfort, more rot than redemption. The air shifted again, heavier. He took a step forward, hands raised as though surrendering to the truth itself. "There's more," he said, and the room fell silent. He confessed that weeks before he had signed documents, financial agreements that tied the marriage to his inheritance. My daughter, my flesh and blood, had been unknowingly bound into a contract written in greed. His father had orchestrated it, but he hadn't fought back. He had signed willingly, choosing wealth over honesty. The gasp this time was louder, harsher. Some guests stood in disbelief, their chairs scraping back like gunshots. The officiant's mouth hung open. My daughter crumpled back into her chair, her veil slipping sideways as if it no longer wanted to be part of her. Betrayal bled across her face, shattering the joy that had once been there. My heart broke for her, but another part of me, older, harder, felt grim satisfaction. At least the mask was torn away before it could fester. I thought, better to see a lie torn open now than watch it rot her life quietly. The groom's shoulders slumped, his confession collapsing into silence. The romantic illusion was gone. The wedding was nothing more than a transaction exposed in real time. I sat there, hands folded tightly in my lap, reflecting. Love without truth was nothing but poison disguised as sweetness. I had learned that the hard way in my youth, when trust was crushed beneath the weight of ambition. Now my daughter's tears were the echo of my own past mistakes. Around us, the crowd buzzed with scandal, arguments breaking out in low voices. Some called it fraud, others called it tragedy, but I knew better. It was clarity. This day wasn't cursed. It was clarified. The truth, though sharp and cruel, was still a gift. I promised myself I would protect her, no matter what dismantling it took. Dignity could survive even if vows did not. The groom finally stilled, broken in the center of the room, unable to meet her gaze or mine. For a long beat, no one breathed. Then my daughter stood, her spine stiff, her eyes fierce through the tears. "Then this wedding is over," she declared. Her voice cut the air clean in two. She ripped the veil from her head and hurled it onto the table, the lace fluttering down like a white flag of surrender she refused to carry. Guests gasped, some clutching their pearls, others clapping hands to mouths. The officiant lowered his book slowly, clearly lost on whether to continue or simply step aside. I rose too, steady and deliberate, walking toward her. The crowd hushed, eyes locked on us as though we were the only two people left in the hall. And just as I reached her, another sound broke the silence. The measured steps of a woman dressed in black, striding forward from the back of the room. Her voice rang out, low but sharp. "I have something to reveal as well." I froze, heart thudding. I thought, the truth wasn't finished. It had only begun. The ballroom was so quiet I could hear the clock above the bar ticking, a hollow sound that didn't belong in a room filled with flowers, lace, and broken promises. My daughter's words still hung in the air. Her announcement that the wedding was over had cracked the evening wide open. Guests shifted nervously in their chairs, unsure whether to stand, to clap, to leave, or to simply watch the disaster unfold. Forks scraped across forgotten plates, the faint clinking making my chest tighten. And then she appeared. A woman in black. Tall, mid-40s maybe, with dark hair swept neatly back and sharp eyes that seemed to cut straight through the smoke of lies filling that room. She didn't walk in timidly. She strode forward, heels clicking against the polished floor, each step echoing louder than the last. Heads turned, whispers spread like fire, but no one seemed to know her. She wasn't part of our family, not a friend of the groom's, not on any guest list I'd seen. She stopped in the center of the aisle, cleared her throat, and the whispers died instantly. My breath caught. Sometimes truth doesn't come from those seated comfortably at the table. It comes from the shadows watching, the voices ignored. "I need to speak," she said firmly, voice steady, calm, and oddly commanding. The room fell fully silent. "My name is Evelyn Ward," she began, drawing a small envelope from her bag. "I used to work for the groom's family business." Her eyes locked on the groom's father, a man whose jaw tightened so visibly I could see the vein in his neck pulsing. Evelyn held her ground. "I was dismissed after I questioned the practices I witnessed. Tonight, I can no longer stay silent. This marriage, this celebration, it's built on lies and money meant to bury the truth." Gasps filled the room. A woman near me covered her mouth with her napkin. A young man near the back raised his phone, hitting record. The groom paled. His father leaned forward as if to lunge, but too many eyes were on him. She lifted the envelope slightly higher. "Inside this are documents proving the financial misconduct and exploitation hidden behind these wedding vows. Debts, contracts, signatures forged. Your daughter's inheritance," she glanced at me, "was never safe." My heart clenched. I should have felt only fear, but instead, A strange hope stirred. Maybe, finally, someone had the courage to bring what was hidden into the light. Paper, I thought, can cut deeper than knives when it carries secrets written in lies. When she unfolded the papers, the sound of creased parchment was louder than the ballroom's air conditioning. She held up records, bank transfers, contracts stamped in ink, checks signed with names that weren't the real signatures. She explained clearly. The groom's father had planned to siphon my daughter's inheritance into their crumbling ventures, using her trust and her future as collateral. The groom's voice broke, shaking. It's true. His hands trembled as he reached for the documents. I didn't know at first, but when I asked, they told me to stay quiet, to marry her and pretend. His face burned with shame as he dropped the papers onto the table. My daughter's knees buckled and I rushed to catch her. Tears streamed down her face, not just because of the betrayal, but because every tender word she'd trusted had been poisoned. "Mom," she whispered, her voice raw. "I thought he loved me." The guests erupted, some shouting accusations at the groom's family, others demanding answers. One man shouted, "You think you can steal from her and get away with it?" I stood taller, my hand steadying my daughter's shoulder. This stranger, Evelyn, had just shifted the battlefield in my favor. The fortress they built from deceit had collapsed under the sheer weight of their greed. I turned toward Evelyn, my voice steady. "You've done something tonight that no one else had the courage to do. Thank you." Facing the groom's family, I spoke louder, firm enough that even the ones trying to sneak out by the back doors heard me. "You tried to turn my daughter into a pawn. You thought her love was currency, her future a bargaining chip. Not anymore." The groom's father roared back. "You don't know what you're saying. This is slander." But the crowd didn't buy it. A woman shouted from the corner, "We saw the papers." Another man called, "You can't bury this anymore." The balance of power had shifted, and they could feel it slipping. My daughter clung to my arm, whispering desperately, "Mom, what do we do now?" I kissed her forehead, steady as stone. "We walk out with our dignity, let them choke on their own ruin." The quiet applause that followed wasn't loud, but it was enough. Strangers nodding at us, guests murmuring support, it gave me strength I hadn't realized I still had. This wasn't just a ruined wedding, it was a battlefield, and I stood on solid ground. But Evelyn wasn't finished. Just as I prepared to lead my daughter toward the doors, she raised her hand again. "Wait, there's more you need to know." Her voice was lower now, but it carried a different weight, heavier, darker. The groom's father stiffened, his hand gripping the table as though he could crush wood with his fingers. Evelyn's gaze swept the room. "What I've shown tonight is corruption and greed. But there's something else, something more dangerous." She paused, letting the silence drag until I could feel the dread coiling in my chest. "He has ties to criminal networks, and anyone who dares oppose him risks far more than money." Gasps, shouts, and the shuffle of chairs filled the ballroom. A few guests rushed out, unwilling to linger near something that now smelled of real danger. My throat went dry. The battle wasn't just about deceit. It was survival. Evelyn walked to the head table and slid a final sealed envelope across the linen toward me. Her eyes held mine, unwavering. "This," she said quietly, "is what will decide everything." I placed my hand over the envelope, feeling its weight like a stone on my palm. The ballroom was hushed, as if every chandelier had gone dim at once. I stood at the center, the sealed envelope in my hand trembling, not from weakness but from the sheer weight of everything that had led me here. My daughter clung to my arm, whispering, "Mom, please. Maybe this is too dangerous." Her breath was quick, her voice sharp with panic. Around us, the guests held up their phones, some recording, others frozen, waiting. I saw the groom's father at the far end, his lips moving, signaling security to step forward. My eyes narrowed. Truth doesn't whisper. It roars when the moment comes. I inhaled slowly and tore the envelope open. The sound of ripping paper cracked through the silence. Inside lay photographs, bank slips, and a thumb drive, heavy with secrets. My fingers spread the contents across the table. A murmur surged through the crowd. The stranger beside me, the woman who had slipped this envelope into my hands, spoke low but firm. It all ties back to him. Syndicates, dirty money, payoffs, threats. Her voice cut through the thick air like a knife. Gasps erupted. Guests shifted back, some rushing toward the exit as if corruption were contagious. I saw faces pale. The groom lowered his head into his hands, shoulders shaking. "I knew," he mumbled, barely audible. "I knew, but I couldn't." His words dissolved in shame. My daughter stared at him, tears carving paths down her cheeks. "You were going to let me marry into this?" she cried, her voice breaking in disbelief. My throat tightened, but I steadied myself. A marriage built on blackmail isn't love, it's a life sentence. I raised my voice above the chaos. "This isn't just about owning this venue," I declared. "It's about protecting my family." Federal authorities were contacted hours ago. With her help, I gestured to the stranger, we made sure this evidence didn't disappear. Murmurs swelled into shouts. Guests lifted their phones higher as I added, "And this entire confrontation is being live-streamed. Every lie, every crime, every threat, you're exposed." The groom's father's face twisted with rage. He lunged forward, his voice booming. "You don't know who you're dealing with. You'll regret this." His threats bounced off me like stones against steel. Security moved to restrain him, but before they could, the ballroom doors burst open. Uniformed officers flooded in, commanding presence, authority undeniable. Gasps turned into cheers as the groom's father was pinned, his wrists bound. Cameras flashed, the spectacle captured from every angle. My daughter collapsed into my arms, her sobs muffled against my shoulder. Relief washed over me as I held her close. The groom stumbled toward us, eyes red, pleading. "Please, forgive me. I didn't know how to stop him. I lifted my chin, my voice steady as ice. "My family doesn't beg at the feet of liars." He stopped cold, words dying in his throat. Applause rippled through the guests, some standing, some clapping until their palms stung. Vindication had a sound, and it was thunderous. Officers escorted the groom's family out, their empire unraveling under the weight of truth. The stranger lingered near, her eyes soft but determined. "I risked everything to bring this to light," she said quietly. I squeezed her hand. "You won't stand alone anymore." My daughter, still trembling, whispered against my ear, "Mom, you saved me." I kissed her hair. "When wolves circle, you don't cry. You sharpen your teeth." Around us, the ballroom felt lighter, as though the lies had been swept away with the disgraced. Guests began leaving in clusters, their voices echoing with the same phrase. Justice was served tonight. I gathered my things, my hand steady now. The stranger approached once more, her eyes darting toward the doors. She pressed a small piece of paper into my palm. "This isn't the end," she whispered. "There are others tied to him, people who won't forgive you for tonight." She slipped me her number and stepped back, fading into the thinning crowd. I tucked the paper into my purse, silent, my gaze drifting to the ballroom doors. Beyond them, night stretched wide and uncertain. Sirens wailed in the distance, growing closer, mingling with the city's restless hum. I straightened my shoulders, walking toward the exit with my daughter at my side. Some wars end with a bang, others with a shadow, and sometimes they never end at all.